Let's just sort of kick things off here. Welcome everybody to the Creative Industries Week. We're talking all week. We have wonderful speakers, thinkers, artists, creatives, organizers. We got some founders here on this discussion, which is very exciting. Um, and just thinking about different sort of issues with creative economy development as the New Mexico EDD launches the new Creative Industries Division. My name is Mike. I work for an organization called Creative Startups, and we are working with the EDD, the Poe Cultural Center, and Vital Spaces to craft a plan for the new Creative Industries Division. And as we talk about entrepreneurship for creatives, for artists, one thing that is very important everywhere, and especially in New Mexico, is that notion of entrepreneurship is in harmony with cultural values that exist in communities that have been in New Mexico since long before it was quote unquote New Mexico. And so that is part of what we're going to be talking about today, and just this idea of how to make notions of entrepreneurship sort of harmonize with community development as well as individual development. And we're very excited to be joined by three really wonderful thinkers from Tewa Women United. We have Nathana Bird, who is the associate director. And also from Tewa Women United, we have the co-founder, Kathy Juan Povi Sanchez, who is also this Sayan coordinator of Tewa Women United. And we also have Kelly Holmes, who is the founder of Native Max Magazine and founding member of Native American Capital and Investment Alliance. So I just wanted to sort of share who everybody was first, and then we'll just sort of go in alphabetical order, and maybe we'll start with Nathana. And if you can tell us just a little bit about your work with Tewa Women United, and your thoughts about this idea of how do we make the notion of entrepreneurship training harmonize with cultural values and sort of make it something that people in communities that's organic, that people trust. You know what I mean?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Nathana Bird. I am from Okeawinga and San Domingo Pueblo. Um, Also serving as Associate Director with Tewa Women United. A part of my role here at Tewa Women United has really started from grassroots efforts, right? So I started as a youth organizer with Tewa Women United, really focusing in on environmental justice work, youth organizing, eventually going into education and reproductive justice. And so one of the things that really allowed me to step into these roles is being grounded within those values. A lot of the work that Tewa Women United does really hones in on our teachings as Tewa people. We grow up with these values in our communities. We grow up with our elders sharing these values. Sometimes, as a young person, you don't quite know what they are. You hear them while you're in community, but sometimes you don't have a deep understanding of what they actually mean. And so for me, Table Women United was that space to really explore and learn from our elders exactly what those values are, what they entail, and how those values become actions. And so for me, working alongside Kathy and other folks with Table Women United, I've been able to really kind of see values through lived experiences. And it's really, for me, grounded myself in how do I also practice those values and how do I teach those values. And then also, how do I create space in my own family and community to exercise those values? So I really, I think, deeply like when you're starting any sort of initiatives surrounding conversations around what is guiding our work and grounding our work and where our what are our parameters or our boundaries of what we will do and what we won't do. And so the values really serve as that sort of like buffer or bumpers, right, for you to engage in certain things and not to engage. And I think through our work, we definitely exercise that, really having our own stances and value systems to help us make decisions of things we're going to go for, things we're not going to go for, and also how do we not how do we stay sort of like grounded into that and really tethered to it to where we don't sway away from those buffers or those values that really kind of keep us in line with our mission and our values, and also our journey as an organization. And so for me, it's not only helped me in my own leadership, but also in my family and my community and how I show up. So I really appreciate just the way that we're grounded in our values and continue to live through them and do the work.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's really beautifully said. And I just sort of putting some questions, so I can remember them later also in the chat as we go. But I really loved what you said about like how do we create spaces where we like live the values and particularly have these sort of intergenerational spaces, which is something that's come up several times over the course of the week, the importance of that. Um, and I'm interested in this idea of the bumpers too, and how those bumpers and boundaries sort of help, um, and especially in some of the programs that I know that y'all are running. So we can get into more of that as we go. And then next up, speaking of living values and doing things intergenerationally, we've got Kelly Holmes here from Native Max Magazine, founder of Native Max Magazine, which was, I believe, the first Native founded fashion magazine, right? And also founding member of the Native American Capital and Investment Alliance, who's done a lot of work all over the world and in New Mexico, which is part of the world, allegedly. And yeah, we're just really excited for her to be here today and to share some thoughts about this idea. And I'm particularly interested, Kelly, because you've done so much work with entrepreneurship training in different cultures and communities all over the world. What have you learned about sort of, I mean, weaving entrepreneurship, right? Which is sort of this framework that we exist in and this society that we live in, and it's not perfect, right? How do we weave this idea of entrepreneurship, into cultural values?
So, yeah, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's always amazing to work with you, Mike, and Creative Startups. So, hi everyone, my name is Kelly Holmes. My Lakota name is Wambly Okianwi, which means flies among eagles woman in the Lakota language. And I am Mini Koju and Itazijo Lakota from the Cheyenne River Reservation in South Dakota, but I'm currently here in Denver. And my work pretty much, I was reflecting on this, looking through the questions, and it pretty much just comes from, and of course, here on the panel, we all can understand this idea that if something needs to be done in our communities, you get out there, get off your butt and do something. My mom has always taught me that growing up. You see anything that needs to be changed or whatever it is. So I obviously live with that in my mind at all times. And I feel like that's really the driving force of all of my work that I have done, continue to do. Native Max as well as NASIA are not at all the only things that I do, but of course, my upbringing, my experiences in my life really led me to these foundings of these, I guess, things that I do, my work, of course. But yeah, for me, my values are an important part of my work, the foundations of it, continuing to work in the communities, inside our communities and outside, all the way to across the world. They are always there and, as mentioned, integral part of who I am and my work that I do.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, Kelly. And I think, yeah, I'm excited to sort of hear stories as we go, about how you have sort of traveled and carried and kept these values, in the work that you've done all over the world. And, like, I know that from when we've talked, like, those ideas, like you talk about your mom and like the things you've learned from your mom and how they sort of pop up in surprising places when you're in New Zealand or wherever you are, and suddenly you're like your values are collaborating in this really sort of interesting way with the values that you meet. And so yeah, I imagine we'll get into some of those stories. And yeah, finally I want to introduce really wonderful. We're very excited, very honored to have with us here Kathy Povi Sanchez, who was one of the co-founders of Tewa Women United and is a community activist and has worked all sorts of issues throughout her life around culture, the environment, and social change. And particular, I believe you were you founded the Circle of Grandmothers program, right? Am I right about that? You started that maybe? Um,
Yes. So I've always been about the collective. So I
yes,
always a circle of grandmothers that work together collaboratively in order to do what we do. So instead of just saying the founder or the co-founder, it's always the collective. I don't want to leave
right.
it. It's all
Yeah.
culturally. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean that makes a lot of sense. And I was trying to figure out the best way to frame it. So yeah, absolutely. And yes, thank you very much for being here today. And yeah, maybe can you tell us a little bit about that, just that process of starting things with people, starting things collectively, and even that right there, right? Like that is a value um that you have brought with the people you work with into things like starting organizations and might be different than other ways. Maybe some of, like I or other folks in the webinar audience have thought about starting things. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about starting Tewa Women United with the folks you started it with and just how you've maintained those values throughout all the projects and programs you've done.
Yeah. So growing up in the 50s was at a time when we were raised in a traditional pueblo, raised with my parents, my grandparents, and my great grandparents. And then at the same time, you're right in the middle of Los Alamos with the economics being of the bomb, creating the bomb. So there's always trying to manage contradictions and not choosing one over the other or X and one over the other. And if we're very grounded in our identity of who am I, and then you're in two different ways of knowing. You have the knowingness of your exponential presence with Mother Earth. And then at the same time, you are right in the mix of the knowledge base where everything that is of money orientated system comes into the system. And then we're always questioning. So always asking, well, who am I? What's my purpose in life? And so I guess if you're really grounded in your cultural ways of knowing, it's not necessarily what's my purpose in life, what am I supposed to be doing, but it's more of like who is my purpose in life, and who am I doing the work for and with, and what are the values that I live with that we hear in our communities, and what are the values in a business or in a workplace that grounds you so that you're not having to really be torn between managing the contradictions you're hearing from both sides, but honoring our ability to question and to honor the core values that we live with. And so those core values, I guess the words that really, the struggle is it transmutation that has to happen, acculturation and assimilation, or is it transformative? How do we, if we were first giving our presence in our mother's womb, and we're in that comfort of the fluids that feed from her to us, and then when we are immersed, we come out to the plant world, and we're on Mother Earth, and then how do we have those senses, the experiential way of knowing heartbeat, the rhythms, the sounds, what nourished us, and what values do we have? Are we in a culture of violence, in disowning who we are, or is it a culture of peace where we're able to be land-based peoples, and that we honor the trees and talk to the trees because they're relatives? And water is in us. We're vessels that contain water, but rivers, streams, waters, they have their energy. So how do you respect the flow of energy and not transmute it to something that serves one but not the other? Or have that contradiction of, you're better if you have your degrees, but you can't raise money on the land. Or if you're on the land, you don't need to have that outside influence. So it's that our young people are questioning that same ability of, who am I? And how do I be proud of who I am? And how does my education help fund and feed me in the place that gives nurturance? Or do I have to go and do the currency chase through a different system, and not being with their grandparents, learning the stories of time of working the land, or being a pregnant woman farmer, and how do you nourish that child within and all around? So it's always that searching and questioning, and it gets back to, well, how do you live your core values of who you are into the business or into the work that you're doing, and does it nourish you at all times? So that's the transformative aspect of energy. How do we understand energy, fluency, currency? Because the money system has the same terms, right? The fluid currency, what is the current thing? So it's like they mimic, but they isolate the source of that inner thought in there. So how do we keep it in there so that if we do come across the money source, how does it go through the hands in order to feed what it's supposed to nourish, and not be consumed in holding it and having the power over, but how do you have the fluidity of your energy be able to move the wellness of all? So Tewa Women United was founded on those same premises of loving, caring, sharing, and those were like some of the core, there's like 10 core values that we named in order to guide us. And then how do you work through that in a 501c3 organization and still be true to who you are? And so it was amazing that we found people that helped us form our 501c3 with the concept of caring for Mother Earth and stopping the violence that happens to Mother Earth and promote peace in New Mexico. So that was in our mission statement. And so I'm glad that we were able to have that grounding and that connectivity, and not have to deroot us and function in a system that is not serving our needs.
That's really beautifully said. And I really love that you sort of called out the way that, all these sort of the way that we bring the body back into all these metaphors, and the natural world, and that money inherits its metaphors, from water, basically, right? And as you think about the way that water wants to move versus like the way it moves when it's sort of controlled and as you said, transmuted, and this idea of like all like sort of violence versus continuing. And I think that right there is like just such a wonderful example of bringing values to this conversation about quote unquote success. And I want to ask, sort of going back to, so hearing some of these core values, from when Tewa Women United started, Nathana, like, I know that you and I talked about a lot of what y'all are doing these days, right? And how you are continuing those values in the programs that you're running these days, and how I think what's really interesting about your programs is that they are defining quote unquote success in this really important, insistent way that's like different, right, than like mainstream culture maybe. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the work that Tewa Women is doing, some of the programs and the work that y'all are doing right now, and how that's like creating, I don't know the word you would use, but you know, like thriving for your community, health for your community?
Yeah, for sure. Our main focus right now, and throughout the work, has been around protecting women, girls, and Mother Earth. That's our primary sort of thing that we always go back to when we're creating new programs or we're taking on new initiatives. That's the question you ask yourself: is this working to promote safety and protection and the well-being of women, girls, and Mother Earth? And so right now we have three different areas that we're working towards: environmental justice, reproductive justice, and generational healing justice. And so each of them has their own project areas, activities that they're working towards. Our environmental justice was sort of like where we really started our growth from, right? In that we um, recognize just the impact of nuclear industrial systems that are in our communities, and also how that impacts our own health and well-being. And so they've taken on different sort of practices and activities to help address this issue alongside focusing on food and seed sovereignty, and also creating edible food gardens in our community, to allow folks to have options around how to integrate traditional agriculture into their communities and their homes, and sort of have this reclamation of those approaches. And so right now our environmental justice program oversees a hillside here in Espanola in a public park, where we basically revamped a whole entirety of this park to create an edible foods garden that focuses on permaculture and traditional agriculture practices. And from that, we also have developed a seed bank, a public seed bank here at the Espanola Library, to allow folks access to traditional heirloom seeds. And so it's about giving seeds and taking seeds, right? And so the reciprocity, that's the value of Tewa Women United, is the reciprocal nature of making sure that you're giving back to the community as you also are taking pieces of those to create that space within your home. So they also are doing food and seed sovereignty pieces around supporting Pueblo women farmers, having sovereignty meetings to bring awareness to different types of environmental justice issues that are happening here in our community and surrounding communities. We're working with folks like traditional farmers to help us grow out seeds of maybe seeds that have not been grown out in several years. And so we're working on that, trying to do garden beds and different types of things. A lot of work around policy, public comment hearings, and getting advocacy and engagement out to community to be present at these meetings where policies are being made, legislation is happening. And so everything from policy to community engagement to working with traditional seed growers, also teaching folks how to caretake for our garden. So we're hiring contractors to come in and learn about permaculture and traditional practices and how to maintain our edible foods garden. So that's the environmental justice program. And then we have our reproductive justice program, which is where we have a doula services, full spectrum doula services for parents and families in our community. We're actually going to be launching I believe, our third round of doula training, where it's a curricula that we basically created after we went through other doula trainings. We really kind of gathered all the materials, and one of the things that was missing from that was the culturally embedded values of our communities here. And so as a response to hospitals coming in and not having at-home births, Tewa Women United decided that we really needed to start to return to those practices to reclaim birth. And so we started to integrate this doula service to really start having a closer relationship to our birthing practices as women, and also how to have these alternative spaces of healthcare and reproductive justice. And so within that, alongside our doula program, we also do abortion care support. We also help folks get access or learn about resources and get access to alternative medicines and herbal medicines as well. Our EJ, a lot of our work is really about the concept of operi, which is about braiding. So it's a Tewa concept around braiding and integrating that. It's about the intersection, right? Between environmental justice, reproductive justice, and generational healing. And so our environmental justice really talks about how the impact of these nuclear things and environmental degradation has an impact on our bodies, and our reproductive systems, on our families, on our income. And so part of our EJ and reproductive justice work is about integrating traditional practices and knowledges back into our healthcare, our birthing practices, how we care for our families. So we have childbirth ed classes, we have parent circles, we just had a perimenopause workshop last week. So we're constantly creating new spaces for people to explore different types of resources and techniques for them, for their families and community. And then our generational healing justice program really focuses in on the intergenerational healing. So we have several different areas in there. Saya Ing is part of that particular project area. And they also sort of weave themselves in and out of each of the programs, right? So Kathy did a lot of environmental justice work. And then also we've all kind of grown as families and maybe mothers or maybe aunties. And so we're all showing up in different ways to create spaces for families and parents to come in and learn from the knowledge or life experiences that we have. And so part of our generational healing justice program is to provide space for that intergenerational sharing, where we learn from our elders and really work with the young people as well. So we have different types of prevention curricula around healthy relationships, healthy sexuality, engaging young men and boys around gender-based violence prevention work. We have youth council. And then we're also right now in a new initiative around building safe spaces for young people. So that one is particularly around the rebuild of our skate park here in Espanola. And so we're really trying to just hone in on all the whole spectrum of a lifespan, right? From our birth to our young people, to our babies, to those folks that are becoming adults and learning value systems and eventually becoming teenagers, adults, families, community members, all the way to our elders. And so our approach is really about how do we heal the trauma that has existed for generations and generations and really unpack that to make an impact for the next generations to come, to create healthy and well beloved communities for future generations. So
Yeah.
these are all kind of concepts that Kathy and Corinne have honed in on and have taught us over the years of how do we create that beloved community.
Yeah, there's the word, beloved community. Yeah, to define it. Yeah. And it strikes me as sort of hearing about all these really wonderful programs and that have this kind of impact and make the place, make these communities healthy, that these are very creative models, right? They're models that are based around heritage knowledge, and they're creative in the sense that they reject sort of like the dominant society models, right? And it in thinking about that, it makes me think about this idea of the premise of all of this, right? Like of economic development and living in a capitalist society. And, like one thing that seems clear is that if a creative industries division in this particular place, New Mexico, is going to really thrive, it has to harmonize with the idea that it's not a New Mexico is not a place where there's a lot of people really bent on individual success, right? Like it's a place where there's a lot of communities who are really interested in community success, and programs that are focused on like individual success just are not going to make sense or work, right? And I want to ask Kelly, as we think, because I know you've thought a lot about entrepreneurship, right? And like some aspects of entrepreneurship are just about, responding to a need and filling a need, right? And there's that's good. But some aspects of entrepreneurship in the sort of system that we live in are about this idea that like going back to something Kathy said, like, yeah, if I win, you lose, right? And I think that you have pursued, when you're teaching entrepreneurship, you've thought about it differently, right? Like than this, if I win, you lose kind of idea. So maybe could you tell us a little bit about how you think about entrepreneurship so it's not just I win and you lose, and maybe sort of like where you've seen it work really well in your travels?
Yes, so I remember since I was a little girl, I wanted to have a business, and but I noticed there weren't a lot of like resources, opportunities to explore that within me, within, this kid who was interested in business. One red flag, I always say. And when I did go out there, and that's how the whole magazine started, I just had this interest for business and fashion and storytelling and media and all of this cool stuff. And there were no resources, there were no classes, whatever it is. So I started my own business anyway. I didn't care what I was going to do, but I was determined to start my own business. And even then, there were a lack of support. There were no support systems, and I had to and no cult, and especially cultural specific, because when I did go to business seminars and workshops here in Denver, they were very, very white. And again, just the basis of having a business is that you are in competition with everyone, that you have to outsmart, your person sitting next to you. And then it's like, okay, they go out of business, and it's like, yes, you won. And then that was the I guess like the idea around having a business, and it just didn't fit me. I was probably 20 years old when I was going to these seminars and really thinking that this isn't for me. These aren't for me. And the way these business classes are structured, again, are nowhere near what I grew up with. And, talking about our value systems, I grew up immersed into our culture and our language. My mom is a fluent Lakota speaker. I grew up in our culture, and values were an important part of who you are as a person and all of this stuff. So then when I started my business, I embedded my own personal values into my business, and they served as a compass for how I conducted business. And I had the opportunity to join or to enroll into business courses in the colleges here in Denver. One in particular was this accelerator program at CU Denver, but didn't. I didn't. But what I did was I became a member at the Rocky Mountain Indian Chamber of Commerce and mentored under my mentor, Shadena Sultan, who was the ED at the time, as well as other entrepreneurs and other business owners. Obviously, they weren't in the industries that I was looking to be in with my business, but I still, nevertheless watched them and I picked up on everything. So that also spoke to I can never say this word right, but the pedagogical theory of we can watch you do something a few times and then we'll pick up on it like that and then we'll flourish. We'll just go with it and grow our own ideas and our own methods of what we first see. So that's how I learned business. I don't have a business degree. I have no business education. And I'm proud to say I was actually contracted by NMSU to help co-teach and guest mentor one of their business programs for Native entrepreneurs. So I am by all means the most unconventional, most whatever, but that's at the standard of the Western way of doing business, right? But then with us, it's just how we learn. This is normal. Like, oh, you went and did that. Well, no wonder.
Right.
Like, but yeah.
And it strikes me as you're sort of telling your story, like that this openness and that like you were talking about sort of struggling in this environment where it was all about, the person next to you failing and maybe hiding your knowledge from them. And like, if you learned something, you like kept it for yourself so you could like, and then when you moved into this other environment, working under your mentors, working at this, being a part of the Chamber of Commerce that you mentioned, like there was that openness and that knowledge sharing, and that rather than sort of depressing everyone or making everyone less successful, it actually like elevated everyone, right? And I want to ask Kathy a little bit about the Circle of Grandmothers program specifically, because when I was learning about it and I met and talked the last time that Nathana and I talked, I was learning a little bit about it and about how it sort of grew out of this motivation for like self-sufficiency with the women involved, and how that path sort of led to incorporating some ideas around like business training, but that it was actually, again, much bigger than just business. Business was just a part of something larger. So can you tell us a little bit about the Circle of Grandmothers program specifically?
Sure. So the Circle of Grandmothers started around a kitchen table in understanding colonization. Instead of blaming us, for our, like, well, you do it to yourself or you did this thing, like understanding and analyzing what is it that makes us feel bad about ourselves, or why is it that we can't use our language, or why is it that the brain isn't allowed to function fully, and why can't we call water our relatives, And if we understand how the brain functions, so when I went to school, it was experientially being able to know what parts of the brain store information and transforms it to the other side. And then how is it that your hands, the tactile of doing it, has a different memory base? So when you see a picture, a word of chair, then it doesn't register. It's like you have to sit in a chair. Oh, that's what a chair does. So that's the same way with how do you understand the violences that have happened to you, and why can't you speak about it? It's like we're shamed and guilted into it's your own fault. You're that way, as opposed to, well, why? So questioning or asking is permissible, and asking your mind, your heart, and your spirit those questions so they can guide you in your decision making. So the Circle of Grandmothers grew out of the need for women to understand why am I in a domestic violence situation? Why are the children contemplating suicide? Or why can't we as women be head of the land-based claiming, that we can't own the land? Or why, so always wondering what was it like in the thousands of years back when there was survival, when the dragonflies were 300 million years ago are still here. Why is it that that fluidity of energy isn't respected on how it maintains a loving, caring, sharing relationship? So the grandmothers that had come, the ladies that had come together were also in domestic situations. So they were dependent on their husband to make the money. And now that they're out, how do they survive for their children and themselves? And then, so one of it is, well, what do you do? What are you good at? And so they're sewers, or if they're pottery makers, or if they do the woodwork, or, like, how do you then teach them or work with them on investing in themselves? And so if you're going to earn the money, you have to have the credit system, right? So then we shared together in a circle of credit building. So we were lent money as a group. So we helped each other to maintain paying it back. And so that was like a basis for establishing yourself and your ability to be trusted, and then having that understanding of what it is that it means when you're asked about money. Because for us, money is like a bartering tool where you give. If somebody is having a hardship, families come together to do the baking so that the meal can be provided, or there's a burial and then you come together so that it's possible. So it's always, how do you transform reciprocity in a respectful understanding so that the business end of where you go to work or what you're doing also allows you to be present in community and still do your work off the reservation and stuff. So that was one way of the lending circles. And then the other one would be, again, the skills development of how do you, as intergenerational learning, what you've done as an example of how to be present in a loving, caring, sharing way, and not be, like my sons were like, oh, you're wearing your BIA clothes, when my husband would go off in a suit and doing all that, and then come home and put on the coveralls and work in the field, say, oh, you're going to BIA. So it's like in their mind, there's this and then there's that. But how do you then still be a loving, caring person at work and still be that at home, and not have that struggle between, no, I can't share that money because I need that, or, it's always the trust and the higher power, or the ability to be protected in that way, in that, well, if I lend them 200, I know I'm going to get 200 back in this other way. And as long as it's the fluidity of the life giving that we're about. So that's how the transitioning from who you are, from the inside out. And I was talking about the story of the storytelling, where there's two humanoids inside every person. And so the grandfather is telling the grandson, that one is evil and it's very demoralizing, and it's about greed, anger, shame, guilt, power over and all that. And then the other one is about the goodness, like you're caring, you're compassionate, you're sharing, you're generous, how does that work, with those two struggling inside of you, your values, your belief systems. And so when the grandson said, well, which creature wins? Which creature is winning? And the grandfather said, it's the one you feed. So do you feed your soulfulness, or do you feed, that other system that's there struggling? So I think that's a perfect example of just how not giving direct answers, well, you have to do this and you have to do that, but whatever is being thought of in the young person's mind, you help them set the ground for them to experiment, and then you then guide them back on the path, or but you don't say, oh, you can't be doing that. That's not a good way to be. Or you can't, when the young people hear you can't do this, and it's like, I'll show you I can, So it's not that butting heads you're up against. You don't want that. You want to be able to have the fluidity of the male and the female, the motherly, the fatherly relationship to nurture the growingness of your your personhood in your place on Mother Earth.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I love that. And I mean there's so many things that you said in all of that that I feel are just such important models for all of this work. I mean, even from the specific to of, for example, like that idea of collective credit building, um, and that right there is just a really smart, practical, um, and and good idea that should be applied in larger scale. And then also I just really love this idea, like, it's popular refrain like live work balance, right? People are always talking about live work balance. But in listening to what you're saying, what it makes me think about is that, well, why are they different? They're not different, right? Like you're saying, putting on the clothes at work versus putting on the clothes at home, like a real sort of live work balance is to be the same person wherever you are and to be living your values consistently wherever you are and to not have to become a different person just to make money or whatever. And that it also sort of, it strikes me that it goes back to what Kelly, like what you were talking about with this, the pedagogy of one environment where, you were just sort of told how to do something to fit into the business world versus like these other environments that you entered into where you were learning through doing and through like the reciprocity with people that you actually respected, you know? And I think all of those things are really important lessons for anybody wanting to develop these kinds of programs of any kind of sort of development, right? By which I mean like growth or success, all these metaphors. Um, but yeah, I just think there's so many great ideas to take away from everything y'all have been saying. We have a few minutes left, and no one has asked any questions in the Q&A. Um, but um, so if anybody wants to sneak in a question here right at the end, I mean, perhaps people like me have just been sort of like transfixed this whole time. But I think that what I would like to maybe end with all three of you, as we think about the future, and I think all three of you have, interesting different perspectives on what, New Mexico should do or become, right? Um, and maybe each of you, from your experience with this place, can share like one thing that you think, because I really believe that the creative industries division not only is an opportunity for artists to make money, but it's also an opportunity to do economic development more creatively, right? Like to your point, Nathana, about some of your programs that you do, those are creative because they just do things differently. And so if you were going to pick like one thing that you think New Mexico in its trying to grow businesses, trying to grow success, one thing that you think New Mexico should do differently, what would it be? And I know that, there's a huge question, but maybe we can sort of close with that and just sort of give like some quick, big idea answers. And I'll let whoever feels the most passionate ready to go first there. Yeah.
I think couching it within chasing the money. The big industries are quick with big sums of money, but are their core values matching what we need here in New Mexico? And I like the precautionary principle use of do no harm, that it isn't up to us to prove how the business is harming us, but how is the standards within New Mexico saying, show me that you're not going to harm water, you're not going to destroy our lands just so you can make the profit and then leave. So they leave the mess and then they go. So how is something sustainable done and grounded in our state so that we're not chasing harmful industries from coming in and destroying the balance? like I said, the dragonfly was around 300 million years ago. How is it in just 80 years? It's destroyed that completely. And now we're suffering in this extreme weather and in the toxic water. So yes, how do we set the standards to match our core value systems of the culture of peace?
Right. Yeah, that feels to me, I know that I said I wanted everybody to answer, but I mean that feels so good. But does anybody want to add anything to that? Because I think that's, yeah. I mean, if y'all want to add, I don't want to take away from your ability to add things, but that was like so beautifully said that I also don't want to pressure you to say something just to say something. That might have been it right there. Yeah, I think I completely agree with you, and I think that all of us who have spent time in New Mexico, one thing that I think everybody always talks about being struck by is this sense of like defiance, like that we are defying the current, and that we are keeping the lessons of the old, right? Oh, Kelly has raised her hand. Sorry, Kelly. Go for it, Kelly. Did you mean to do that? Yeah.
Well, just to add on to that, but I can finish after you finish your thought.
Oh no, that was it.
Sorry.
That was it. Just that one thing that makes New Mexico so cool is that sort of buried in life going on as usual, things in New Mexico are sort of stubbornly being that dragonfly, and keeping the ways of like that worked before colonization to keep going. And I think there's a lot that we can sort of embrace and learn from that. That's all. Yeah.
I have worked throughout all these years and throughout all the work that I do. I have worked with a lot of New Mexico natives, and I just want to say, especially anyone listening who, works with the state and all this cool stuff, when you think you are making progress and, we're providing, doing all this great work, and, here's what we're achieving, just know it's never enough. Don't ever think that it will always be enough, because it never will be. So always remember that.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I think, yeah, that sort of resonates with it strikes me that like the work of Tewa Women United as an outsider just observing it, that what's so cool about it is that it is based around this idea that we're not going after some like metric of success, like where you're going to be done. It's about sustainability. It's about just continuing to live, and not like hitting some, all right, we did it, which I think is something that can be lots of folks, I think, can take away a lot from. So, yeah, thank you all so much. This was a really, really cool discussion, and I really appreciate all three of you taking the time and everybody who's listening. And we will, yeah, we'll send some follow-up emails with some resources, some of the things that are mentioned. Folks want to go check out that seed library in the Espanola Public Library, and that hill, and all these things. I really encourage folks to go out and get involved in person as well. And yeah, thank you so much to Nathana, to Kelly, and to Kathy for joining us here this afternoon. And yeah, really appreciate it, and really encourage everybody to connect and figure out how to insist on some of this stuff being embedded in like the structures of how things are run in New Mexico. Yeah. Thank you all very much. All right. Take care. Good afternoon, everybody.